Now, we're up to the bottom, about to end page Hay, and we're talking about Asurim Lemizbeach. There are certain things that are prohibited both to Achilas Adam, like Kilayim and so forth, and therefore, ipso facto, you cannot use them on the Mizbeach. So Kilayim would be a case where he crossbreeds two minim of animals, let's say a keves and an aze, and the product of such a crossbreeding is called kilayim, and it cannot be brought as a korban. Now we have a case of an animal of one species that magically somehow gave birth to another species. That's called nidmeth. Aze, which is a goat, sheyolda kmin keves, and it gave birth to a kind of a sheep. Or Rachel, which is a sheep, sheyolda kmin aze, it gave birth to a goat. Again, how that happened, I don't know. Havlad hu nidmeh. Nidmeh means it looks like it belongs to the wrong species, and that's excluded from the Mizbeach. Now we turn to page Vav. Yotzei Dofen. This is what we call a cesarean birth. So let's say an animal could not give birth on her own, and as a result of a surgical operation, we were able to bring the Vlad into existence, but it was never Yotzei Miterech from the normal way, Derech HaOlam Min HaRechem. Again, it's called Yotzei Dofen, and it's excluded from the Mizbeach. Now we have a case of a Yasam, which means that the mother was shechted, and now the Vlad was born after the Shechita, also excluded from the Mizbeach. We have a case of a Rovev and Nirva. The Torah says in Pashas, in the 22nd chapter of Vayikra, it says, Ki moshchasam b'hem mumbam. The word moshchasam comes from the Torah Hashchasa, and that's talking about a case where there was an act of bestiality between a human being and an animal. That animal is called a nirva, or if it was a female human being with a male animal, that's called a rovea. The animal's a rovea, and it's considered a davar shebe'erev. It's excluded from the mizbeach, a rovea and a nirva. We also have a case of an animal that was worshipped as an idol. That's called avodas kochavim, also excluded from the mizbeach. Rovea and nirva called the davar shebe'erva, can't use them on mizbeach. And the psul is chal on the beima sherav'o nirva acha shehukta shalakarbon. Even though you already designated this animal before the act of reveal as a carbon, and the act of reveal was subsequent, nevertheless it becomes possible, even though it had a minute ago the status of hegdesh l'mizbeach. Or I guess an animal that was responsible for the death of a human being, it attacked a human being, it is disqualified like a roveh and nirva from the mizbeach. And apparently, that would apply even in the case of a shartam, of an animal that has not proven itself time after time after time to be a belligerent animal. Nevertheless, it was responsible for the death of a human being. It's called a shar shaharag es ha'adam, excluded from the mizbeach. It's not a punishment for the shar. It's not even a punishment for the owner of the shar. It's just a din, that's how a status change in the animal when it attacked a human being and caused that human's being dead. My only question here, which I'd love to research, but we don't have the time now, is what happens if an animal was threatened by a human being, and in self-defense, the animal pounced upon the human being and killed it? I don't know if that would be a mitigating circumstance. Now we have something called muktzah. What is muktzah? Now, the animal has not yet been worshipped, but it's been designated for worship. And once the Baal HaBehema, and only the Baal HaBehema could do this, he was maktzah. Maktzah means he designated this animal for the purpose of avodas kochavim. That's called muktzah. However, we have a machlokes in between the Rambam and the Ravid. The Ravid is of the opinion that once the animal is designated for avodah zarah, that itself generates the status of a nevad, as if it was already worshipped, and it's possible in mizbeach. The Rambam says no. Muktzah, the fact that he designated it, in and of itself is not enough, if it hasn't been worshipped yet, to disqualify the mizbeach as if it was a nevad. But we need that the priests of the monastery, of the center of idolatry, should have done something to prepare the animal for its status as part of the idol worship, as part of the ritual. And that's called Asu B'Komrim Maisa Litzorech Avodas Kochavim. And again, that's against the Ravid, because the Ravid says you don't need a Maisa B'Komrim Litzorech Avodas Kochavim. You just need Muktzah. Now this psul is only chal before he was magdish the animal. I'm not sure why. Let's just think if we can come up with any explanation. Oh, I understand. At least according to the Ravid, I can understand. If the psul of muktzah is just simply a result of designating the animal, then once the animal is already hegdish l'mizbeach, then your action is meaningless. Who are you? You're not the boss. Before you were magdish, your animal, you could do with what you want. You could be maktzit l'avodah zarah. But if it belongs to the mizbeach, you already magdish it. It's out of your control. You're in a dominion. You can't now redirect it towards avodas kochavim. If you hold like the Rambam Shita that you need at the Komer do an action, then it's a little bit more problematic. But still, we're talking about muktzah and the Bailim were maktzah. Nevad. Nevad means that it was actually worshipped, whereas muktzah is only chal before he was makdish. Nevad is a psul that's chal even after he was makdish. Esnan umachir, and this has to do with the parsha of Zona. When a man has a relationship with a zona, with a harlot, and as payment he designates, let's say, an animal in this case, that animal has the status of an esnan zona because it was designated for payment for an act of immorality, and therefore it is possible in mizbeach. Then we have something, and that's based on a pasuk lo savi esnan zona beis Hashem Elokecha. Hitavas Hashem Elokecha. Now we have something called Mechir Kelev, which is mentioned in the same pasuk. And that's a behema that was used in a barter deal for a dog. Very interesting hashkafa of Judaism towards dogs. You know, in many ways, Judaism puts a dog on a special level. Now we owe a tremendous hakaras hatov to the dogs, to the extent to which that if an animal dies and it's an avela, we have to feed its corpse to a dog, you know, in deference, in recognition and gratitude to the dog. But on the other hand, in this particular parasha called Mechir Kelev, Torah's attitude towards a dog is a little bit, how should I say, demeaning. So that if a person switches an animal in a barter exchange for a dog, that animal is puzzle of his bear. But once again, when we talk about Esnan Zono or Mechir Kelev, we're talking before the Agdosh. Once he was Magdashit, and what does it mean he gave it to his Zona as payment for her services, or he swapped it for a dog? He doesn't have the control, the dominion to do so. Once he was Magdashit, it belonged to Hegdish. Now we have something called Treifa. Treifa is an animal that has one of 11, how many are there? Oh, he doesn't tell you the exact number. That we'd have to look in the Rambam. In any event, there's a whole enumerated list of internal organs which are critical. And if there's an injury to one of those internal organs, the animal is called the treifa. And it's possible in his back. It's also asabachila. So if you want to know why is it excluded from the mizbeach, you can say very simply because since you can't eat it, you're not allowed to give it to the mizbeach. Now he has a discussion about nimtzeis treifa liachar shchita. So he has a famous Kodshim, he already checked it, and now they find out that it's a treifa. So you might have argued that since at the time of the shechita we had no reason in the world to suspect that this animal is a treifa, it has a chezkas bria, a healthy animal, therefore we can go ahead and be makriv of it. No. Now that we know, from the moment we know, and we discover that this animal is a treifa, it's excluded from the mizbeh. Now we have something called gazl, a stolen animal. You want to bring a stolen animal onto the mizbeach. Gazl, behema, vigdisha, he was magdish behema after he's stolen, is also mizbeach. You cannot be magdish an animal to mizbeach if it's stolen. Which reminds us of a stolen lulav that's possibly did mitzvah baba vera. You can't take an object that was stolen and use it for a mitzvah. And in that sense, the mizbeach is no worse than any other mitzvah. However, here, in this context, we're talking about a separate psul that goes way beyond mitzvah baba vera. So forget about mitzvah baver, which is the universal psul that applies to every mitzvah. Now we're talking about a psul in carbon l'mizbeach that's derived from the pasuk in Yeshayahu Hanavi ki ani Hashem ohev mishpat sonei gezel be'ola. Ola means a carbon ola. Now, the very fact that the Gemara derives it from a pasuk, he doesn't tell you exactly where the Gemara is. Indicates that we're going well beyond the universal principle and psul in mitzvahs of mitzvah b'aver. How so? It could be that the principle of mitzvah b'aver itself is derived from the psul carbon of gazul, written and codified in this pasuk, Ani Hashem Ohev Mishpat Sonei Gezel B'Ol. This is the paradigm from which we derive the universal principle of mitzvah b'aveh. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that this psul is limited to carbon, and mitzvah b'aveh is a drabanan. You steal a sukkah, and I throw out the bialim from the sukkah, and I sit in the sukkah, I'm not yotzei. That's a drabanan. But I would suggest the following, that there might be a difference in definition between the psul carbon of Gazel and mitzvah b'avera. In definition. Mitzvah b'avera goes beyond Gazel. Let's say, for example, you make matzah out of chadash, and you eat that matzah, and you violate the Isur D'Oraisa of chadash. It could be that that negates, or what word am I looking for? That invalidates the mitzvah. And we're talking about an Isur chadash. We're not talking about gezel. So whether or not the psul of mitzvah b'avera is D'Oraisa, it definitely has a broader scope than the psul karma, which is derived from the pasuk sonei gazel. Because this pasuk only refers to gazel. So I'm wondering, let's say the first day of Sukkot was Shabbos, 15th of Tishrei fell on a Shabbos. And you would carry a lulav from Rishus HaRabim to Rishus HaYachid, and then shake the lulav. Ulakachtem lachem. Could be that's mitzvah b'avera. You didn't steal the lulav, it's your lulav, but you carried it and violated meleches hotzah. In carbon, the reason why the carbon is possible is because it's gazul. It's a stolen carbon. The Shem Gezel is imprinted, so to speak, is written on, sealed into the very fiber of the animal. It's a psul hefza. When I carry a lulav from one rishus to the other, there's nothing inherent in the hefza. It was a ma'aseh gavra of hotzah, but yet it might be that the mitzvah is disqualified. Any mitzvah that came through any sort of an avera, and the avera facilitated the kiyum mitzvah. Without the avera, he wouldn't have done the mitzvah. He couldn't have achieved the mitzvah and implemented it. That is a psul of mitzvah b'avera, and it might undermine the mitzvah. But in carbon, there's a separate halach of gazel. And the Torah declares, I cannot tolerate gazel on the mizbeach. There's something in the animal that changes, just like we spoke about nirva, nevad, muktzah, haragas adam, treifa. All the above reflect a change, in the negative sense, to the chefts of the animal. That's where gazel belongs. Gazel effectuates a change in the status of the animal. It takes on a status of gazel, and it's possible in this way. Now, the next section on the left column of page Vav gets into the real nitty-gritties, the step-by-step process of hakrovas karbonos. And it's very fascinating that the process of Hakrovas Karbonos does not begin with Shchita. It does not begin as early as Hakdosha. It begins with what's called Bikur. Bet Yud Kuf Vav Reish. And I'm not sure whether Bikur is or is not part of the mitzvah of Hakrovas Karbonos. Bikur means to check out the animal and guarantee that it has no mum. It's not blemished, it's a tam. In modern Hebrew, instead of Bikur, we call it Bikoret. Investigate the animal, check it out. Make sure there's no mum. The Rama writes that we actually hire someone, paying him from the Trumas Alishka, to take on the responsibility, the job of Bikur. He's got to be a very experienced person. He knows what a mum is. And he's going to be responsible to check out the animal and investigate it before it's brought on the Mizbeach. In the case of a Korban Tamid, 4 days before Shechita, they do Bikur, they check out the animal. And it's only on the 5th day after Bikur that they can bring the Korban Tamid. There was a separate Lishka in the Azara where they did the Bikur. And special professionals who had the eye that they could achieve Bikur. They could implement Bikur. Now, what comes first, Hakdosha or Bikur? I would say Hakdosha. But it might be a good idea before you Magdash Behema or the Mizbeach that you check it out. Make sure it's not about mum. Okay, then. Let's just make a note of where we got up to. On page 12. Do we have page Zion, Steve? Yeah. But for some reason, I don't seem to have Zion unless I lost it. You gave me Zion, right? I don't know where I lost it. You get a chance. What? Oh. So again, if you have anything from Zion, including Zion and on, and I would add it to my collection here.